The first time my tech-savvy friend Dave showed me what he'd recovered, I wanted to put my fist through my own wall. He handed me the external hard drive, his face pale. "Mike," he said, "whatever you're about to see, just breathe." He was wrong. Breathing wasn't the problem. The problem was that the man in the video, the man living with my son, the man sleeping next to my ex-wife, was a monster wearing the mask of a saint. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just call the cops. I had to tear that mask off his face in front of the whole world. This is the story of how I did it. Thank you for being here with me. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Drop a comment and let me know what city you're listening from. Knowing you're out there really means a lot. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It all started on a Friday, the kind of perfect autumn day you see in commercials, when the air is crisp and the leaves are a riot of gold and crimson. I pulled my dusty Ford F-150 into the immaculate driveway of a house that looked like it had been ripped from a magazine cover. 2 stories, colonial blue, with white trim so bright it hurt your eyes, and a lawn so perfectly manicured it looked like a green carpet. This was Tom's house, my ex-wife Sarah's house, and for 48 hours a week, my son Leo's house. Tom met me at the door, of course. It was always Tom. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never known a day of self-doubt. As a senior loan officer at a major bank, he wore his success like a custom-tailored suit. His smile was as white as his picket fence, and his handshake felt both firm and condescending, a silent reminder that he was the victor, the one who had built the perfect life I couldn't. "Mike, buddy, good to see you," he said, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. The word buddy felt like a deliberate jab, a way to put me in my place as a friendly outsider. He was always performing, always showing me how much better he was at being a family man. The kind of man Sarah had always wanted. I saw it in the way he casually draped an arm over Sarah's shoulder when she appeared, in the way he spoke about our plans for the weekend. I was just the weekend dad, the contractor with calloused hands and a truck that always smelled faintly of sawdust and gasoline. And then I saw Leo. My son, my 10-year-old boy, was standing behind Tom, half hidden by his stepfather's frame. He looked tired. It wasn't the healthy post-school fatigue. It was a deeper weariness that settled in his eyes, making them seem older than his years. On his forearm, just below the sleeve of his t-shirt, was a nasty purplish bruise, already fading to a sickly yellow at the edges. My gut clenched. It was an involuntary physical reaction, a father's alarm bell ringing loud and clear. I knelt down to his level, forcing a casual smile. "Hey, champ, what happened there? Looks like you got into a fight with a wild animal." Leo flinched, his eyes darting to Tom before looking back at the floor. It was a fleeting glance, but it was enough. I fell," he mumbled. "Oh, that," Tom jumped in, his voice a smooth, dismissive laugh. "Our little soccer star took a tumble at practice yesterday. He's tough though, aren't you, Leo?" He ruffled Leo's hair, a gesture that was supposed to look affectionate, but seemed more like a reassertion of control. Leo just nodded, his gaze still fixed on the polished hardwood floors. Sarah came out then, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked stressed, fine lines of tension etched around her eyes, but she forced a smile for me. "He was a bit clumsy," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You know how boys are." The story was perfect, rehearsed, a neat little package of plausible deniability. But a father knows. You know that deep-down primal feeling when something is fundamentally wrong, even when everything on the surface screams perfection. It was in the way Leo wouldn't meet my eyes. It was in the way Sarah's smile didn't reach them. It was in the way Tom's explanation came a little too quickly. I felt a surge of cold, impotent rage, followed by a familiar wave of uselessness. What could I say? Question them? Accuse the perfect man in his perfect house? I was the ex-husband, the weekend dad. My words would be twisted into jealousy, bitterness. So I did what I always did. I played my part. "Well, make sure you put some ice on it, buddy," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I hugged him, feeling the frailness of his small body against my chest, and the image of that bruise burned itself into my mind. I drove away with my son beside me, a forced silence filling the cab of my truck. I glanced at him, Chatterbox Leo, now staring out the window, lost in a world I couldn't enter. The perfect house with its perfect family faded in my rearview mirror, but the feeling of wrongness followed me all the way home, a cold shadow I couldn't shake. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the bruise on my son's arm wasn't from a fall, and I had no idea what to do about it. The weekend with Leo was quiet, too quiet. My son, who usually filled my small house with the chaotic energy of a whirlwind, was subdued. He played his video games, but without the usual whoops of victory or groans of defeat. He helped me in the workshop, sanding a piece of scrap wood, but his movements were mechanical, his mind elsewhere. I tried to probe gently, asking about school, about his friends, about soccer practice. He gave me one-word answers, his gaze always averted. The invisible wall between us felt thicker than ever. On Sunday evening, as I drove him back, the dread in my stomach grew with every mile. Pulling into that perfect driveway felt like delivering him back to a prison, one with fresh-baked cookies and a two-car garage. Tom was waiting at the door again, that same proprietary smile plastered on his face. "Have a good weekend, guys?" he asked, putting a hand on Leo's shoulder and steering him inside, a silent claim of ownership. I watched my son disappear into the house, and I was left standing alone on the pristine concrete, feeling like a failure. The memory of our own broken family haunted me on the drive home. Sarah and I hadn't divorced because of some explosive betrayal. It was a slow erosion, a death by 1,000 cuts. I had been obsessed with building my contracting business from the ground up. The 60-hour weeks, the missed dinners, the exhaustion that left me emotionally vacant. I had convinced myself it was all for them, for a better future. By the time I realized the foundation of my own family was crumbling, it was too late. Sarah had met Tom, a man who was always present, always charming, always available. I had built houses for strangers while my own home fell apart. It was a regret that I carried with me every single day, a heavy stone in my gut. And now, that regret was compounded by a gnawing fear for my son. The call came a week later, on a Tuesday morning. I was on a job site, the air thick with the smell of cut pine and the scream of a circular saw, when my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Mike, I know this is a huge favor," she started, her voice tight and strained, "and you can totally say no, but I'm in a bit of a bind." I leaned against a stack of plywood, my guard immediately up. "What's up, Sarah?" "It's the house," she said, a forced sigh in her voice. "There's a crack in the storage room wall, a big one. Tom thinks the foundation might be settling. You know this stuff. He's so swamped at the bank, and I don't trust any of the contractors in the book. Could you just take a look? I'll pay you, of course." My mind raced. A settling foundation was a serious issue, a contractor's bread and butter. But it was the way she said it, the carefully constructed excuse for Tom's absence, the slight tremor in her voice. It didn't feel right. Tom, the man who prided himself on his perfect home, was too busy to deal with a potential structural problem. He'd rather have his wife's ex-husband poking around his property? It made no sense. "Yeah, sure," I heard myself say, against my better judgment. "I can swing by tomorrow. Is anyone going to be home?" "No, we'll both be at work and Leo's at school. I'll leave the key under the mat," she said quickly, a little too quickly. "Thank you, Mike. You're a lifesaver." She hung up before I could ask any more questions. The next day, I found the key exactly where she said it would be. Letting myself into the silent, cavernous house felt like trespassing. It was immaculate, everything in its place, like a showroom. There were photos everywhere, of Tom and Sarah on vacation, of Tom and Leo at a baseball game, of the three of them as a perfect, happy family. My photo, the one of Leo and me from our fishing trip last summer, was relegated to a small frame on a side table in the hall, an afterthought. I found the storage room in the back, just off the laundry. I flicked on the light and saw the crack. It was a jagged, ugly thing, running horizontally across the drywall for about 3 feet. I ran my hand over it, and that's when my professional instincts took over from my personal anxieties. As a contractor with 20 years of experience, I knew instantly. This wasn't from a settling foundation. Foundation cracks are typically vertical or stair-stepped, following the mortar joints of the blockwork. This was a horizontal fracture, a stress crack. And the plaster around it, it was new. It was a sloppy, rushed patch job, barely sanded, the texture all wrong. It was a cover-up. My heart started pounding, a heavy thud against my ribs. Someone had done something to this wall, then tried to hide it. My gaze fell to the floor. Near the base of the wall, almost hidden by a stack of storage bins, was a small, glittering shard. I picked it up. It was a piece of tempered glass, the kind used for a cell phone screen. Standing there in the cold, silent room, a terrible theory began to form in my mind. The bruise on Leo's arm, the patched wall, the broken glass, they were all connected. I had to know what was behind that wall. I went back to my truck and grabbed my utility knife and a flashlight. My hands were shaking slightly as I returned to the storage room. I took a deep breath and carefully cut a neat square out of the drywall, just below the crack. The blade sliced through the soft gypsum board with ease. The square came away, and I shone my flashlight into the dark, hollow space between the studs. There was no structural damage. No rotten wood, no termites, no sign of a shifting foundation. The space was clean, filled only with pink fiberglass insulation. But there was something else. Wedged down at the bottom, half buried in the insulation, was a cell phone. Its screen was shattered, the case splintered, as if someone had tried to destroy it in a fit of rage before hiding it. It was Sarah's old phone model, the one she'd replaced a few months ago. My blood ran cold. Why would a broken phone be hidden inside a wall? I reached in, my fingers closing around the cold, dead device. I pulled it out and turned it over in my hand. This wasn't just a broken phone. This was a secret. And I had a terrible feeling that whatever secret it held was going to destroy the perfect facade of this house forever. I stood there in the silence of the storage room for what felt like an hour, the broken phone feeling unnaturally heavy in my palm. My mind was a whirlwind of dark possibilities. Why hide it? Why not just throw it away? The only reason to hide something so deliberately, so desperately, is because it holds something you can't afford for anyone to see. I pocketed the phone, my movements stiff and deliberate. I took a photo of the hole in the wall with my own phone, documenting everything. Then, I went back to my truck, grabbed a spare piece of drywall, some joint compound, and my tools. I worked with a cold, methodical precision, patching the hole I'd made, making it look like I had simply inspected the area and found nothing amiss. I couldn't let them know I had found it. I couldn't let Tom know his secret was out. As I smoothed the final layer of compound over the patch, I felt a chilling certainty. I was no longer just a contractor fixing a wall. I was an investigator covering my tracks. I sent Sarah a text before I left. Hey, looked at the wall. It's not the foundation, just a stress crack from the house settling. I patched it up for you. No charge. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I needed them to believe the problem was solved, that the secret was still safe within their perfect walls. The first person I called was Dave. Dave was an old high school buddy who had turned his teenage obsession with taking apart electronics into a lucrative career running a small data recovery and tech repair shop. He was a wizard, a digital necromancer who could raise data from the deadest of devices. I found something, I told him when he answered, my voice low and urgent. And I have a terrible feeling about it. I need you to look at a phone for me. It's been through a lot. An hour later, I was in the controlled chaos of his workshop, surrounded by circuit boards, soldering irons, and the hum of computer fans. I laid the shattered phone on his workbench. He picked it up, examining it under a magnifying lamp like a jeweler inspecting a flawed diamond. "Screen's a total loss," he muttered. "Case is cracked, looks like impact damage. But the logic board, maybe. If the flash memory isn't fried, I might be able to pull something. No promises, Mike, and it won't be cheap." "I don't care about the cost," I said, my voice tight. "Just find out what's on it." He shot me a concerned look. "You in some kind of trouble, man?" "I hope not," I said, "but I think my son might be." The next 2 days were agonizing. I tried to work, to focus on blueprints and building codes, but my mind was a million miles away, locked in that dark space behind the wall. Every time my phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. I replayed the scene at the house over and over. Leo's averted eyes, Sarah's forced smile, Tom's overbearing charm. It was like looking at a photograph that was slightly out of focus. You know something is wrong, but you can't quite make out the details. The call from Dave finally came on Friday afternoon. "Mike," he said, his voice stripped of its usual cheerfulness, "you need to come down here, and you need to come alone." The drive to his shop was the longest 10 minutes of my life. When I walked in, he didn't greet me. He just pointed to a chair in front of a large monitor in his private office and closed the door behind us. The external hard drive was already plugged in. "I got most of it," he said quietly. "Photos, messages, a few video files. The last ones recorded are corrupted, but I pieced together what I could. Mike, this is bad." He clicked open a folder. The files were a diary of terror. The first video was just sound at first. The frantic, aggressive clicking of a mouse. The sound of a keyboard being hammered. Then a low growl, an animalistic sound of frustration that erupted into a full-blown roar. The camera lifted, shaky, revealing it was being filmed from the floor, pointed up at the desk. And then I saw Tom. His handsome face was a twisted mask of pure, unadulterated fury, his eyes blazing as he screamed at a laptop screen. "No, no, damn it," he bellowed, his voice so full of rage it was almost unrecognizable. He'd lost a bet, an online poker game. He slammed his fist on the desk, the impact rattling the camera. Then he stood up, kicking the chair away, and turned. With a guttural scream that seemed to tear from his soul, he punched the wall. The exact spot, the exact height where I had found the phone. The screen went dark as the phone must have fallen. My breath caught in my chest. So that was it. A gambling addiction. A violent temper. But the next video was worse. It was filmed secretly, from the crack of a doorway. Tom was looming over Sarah in their pristine white kitchen. His back was to the camera, but I could see her, pressed against the counter, looking small and terrified. His voice wasn't loud this time. It was a venomous, controlled whisper that was somehow more frightening than his screaming. "It's your fault," he hissed, jabbing a finger toward her. "Every time I lose, it's because of the pressure. The bills for this house, the money for your kids' crap. You're a financial drain. You're my bad luck. Do you understand me?" Sarah just nodded, her eyes wide with fear. He wasn't just an addict with a temper. He was a psychological terrorist, systematically breaking her down, blaming her for his own failings, making her believe she was worthless. And then, Dave clicked on the final file, the one that made my blood run cold. It was short, chaotic, filmed from down the hallway. Leo was walking toward his room. Tom's voice boomed from the living room. "Leo, I told you to clean up your toys. Now." Leo, startled, turned. He hadn't responded fast enough. In a blur of motion, Tom was there, grabbing his arm, yanking him hard. "Are you deaf?" he snarled. Leo stumbled, losing his balance and crashing into the sharp corner of a hallway console table. His small cry of pain was cut short as the screen went black, the sound of the phone clattering on the floor. That was the bruise. It was never soccer. I stared at the black screen, my hands clenched into fists so tight my knuckles were white. The pieces didn't just fit together, they slammed into place with the force of a wrecking ball. Sarah wasn't a fool. She was a hostage. She had tried to gather proof, to document the monster she was living with. But Tom had found out. He had smashed the phone, punched the wall, and then the master manipulator went to work. He had probably terrified her, told her no one would ever believe her over him, the respected banker, the pillar of the community. He had likely convinced her that if she left, he'd ruin her financially, fight for custody of Leo, and paint her as an unstable liar. So he invented the foundation problem, a brilliant, cruel move. It was a test. He was forcing her to call me, the one person she couldn't explain the real story to without admitting her perfect new life was a lie. He wasn't just hiding his crime, he was flaunting his control, right in my face. He had made her a willing accomplice in her own imprisonment. I looked at Dave. He just shook his head, his face a mixture of pity and horror. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I pushed myself out of the chair, my legs unsteady. "I'm going to tear his perfect world down," I said, my voice a low growl that I didn't recognize as my own. Brick by brick. I spent that night sitting in the cab of my truck, parked on a quiet street a few blocks from my own house. The engine was off, the silence broken only by the hum of a distant street lamp. The hard drive Dave had given me was on the passenger seat, a small black rectangle that held enough destructive power to level a family. Rage was easy. The primal urge to drive back to that perfect blue house, drag Tom out onto his perfect lawn, and beat the truth out of him was a roaring fire in my veins. Calling the cops was the logical next step. Give them the evidence, let them handle it. But Tom was smart, cunning. He had built a fortress of respectability around himself. If I went to the police, his expensive lawyer would be there in an hour. They'd paint me as the jealous ex-husband, a bitter contractor trying to sabotage his ex-wife's new, happy life. They'd claim the videos were taken out of context, that the phone was planted. And Sarah was the key. Trapped in a web of psychological abuse, shame, and fear, would she testify? Tom had probably spent months convincing her that she was the problem, that his rage was her fault. If she was too terrified to speak up, the case would collapse. It would be my word against the word of a beloved community banker. They'd call it a domestic dispute, issue a warning, and walk away, leaving my son and Sarah in even greater danger. The monster would know I was onto him, and he would become more careful, more insidious. No, a quiet arrest wasn't enough. It had to be undeniable. It had to be public. It had to be a demolition, not just a renovation. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, and I was going to expose every single crack until the whole structure came crashing down around him. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to become a performer, just like him. I had to wear a mask of my own. I downloaded the video files onto a secure, password-protected folder on my laptop. The hard drive went into my safe, a silent bomb waiting to be detonated. The following weekend, when I picked up Leo, I had a plan. I had to play the part of the oblivious, helpful ex-husband. As Tom handed Leo over at the door, I forced a friendly smile. "Hey, Tom, thanks again for letting me look at that wall. It was no big deal. House looks great, by the way. You guys really keep it in top shape." He puffed up with pride, just as I knew he would. "We try, Mike, we try. A man's home is his castle, right?" he said, clapping me on the shoulder again. The casual touch made my skin crawl, but I didn't flinch. I just nodded. "Absolutely," I said. "You're a lucky man." I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. In his mind, I had been successfully managed. The ex-husband was no threat, just a useful handyman to be called upon when needed. My time with Leo that weekend was different. I didn't push him for answers. Instead, I worked on rebuilding the bridge of trust between us. We didn't talk about his home life, we talked about us. We went to the local airfield to watch small planes take off and land. We spent hours in my workshop, not just sanding wood, but building a complex Lego castle, complete with a moat and a dragon. As we worked, our hands busy, I started talking about my own childhood, about being scared of the dark, about a bully in the 4th grade. I talked about how sometimes, even when you know you should tell someone you're scared, it feels impossible. Sometimes, I said, not looking at him, just focusing on clicking a tiny Lego brick into place. Rules can make you feel trapped. Like if you break a rule, something terrible will happen. Leo was silent for a long moment. I didn't press him, I just waited. Finally, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, he whispered, "We have rules." I kept my eyes on the Legos. "Yeah, like what?" "Uncle Tom's biggest rule is, we don't talk about his computer games," he said, his little fingers fumbling with a piece. "He says they're his private work and we're not allowed to bother him, or talk about it, ever." My heart ached for him, for the burden of this secret he was forced to carry. He wasn't just being told to be quiet, he was being trained to be complicit in his own abuser's narrative. Tom wasn't just hiding his addiction, he was conditioning my son to be his silent accomplice. "That sounds like a tough rule to keep," I said gently. He just nodded, his shoulders slumped. But a small crack had appeared in the wall of silence. He knew he could talk to me. It was all I needed for now. The following week, I did something that felt like a betrayal, but I knew it was necessary. I called Sarah, feigning concern. "Hey, I was just thinking. Leo seemed a little down last weekend. Is everything okay with him?" Her defensiveness was immediate. "He's fine, Mike. He's just tired from school. You worry too much." "Maybe," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But he's my son, Sarah. It's my job to worry. Listen, I know Tom's a great guy and you guys are happy, and I'm honestly happy for you. But if anything is ever wrong, I mean anything at all, you can still talk to me. We were family for a long time." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a small pocket of silence where I hoped my words were sinking in. "I know," she said finally, her voice softer. "Everything's fine, Mike, really." She was still in the fortress, defending its walls. But I had planted a seed. I had reminded her that there was a world outside of Tom's control, a world where she wasn't alone. As the days turned into weeks, I gathered my own intelligence. I watched Tom's social media, a curated feed of perfection, photos of him volunteering at a soup kitchen, of him and Sarah at a wine tasting, of him teaching Leo how to throw a baseball. It was a masterpiece of deception. He was building his public persona with the same meticulous care I would use to build a house, making sure every joint was perfect, every surface polished. And I waited. I knew a man like Tom, a man whose ego was built on a foundation of public perception, would eventually need an audience. He would need a stage to display his success. I just had to be patient. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, an email forwarded from Sarah with the subject line, "You're invited." It was an evite, decorated with champagne glasses and confetti. A big garden party at their house. Tom had just been promoted to vice president of lending at his bank. The whole neighborhood, his colleagues from work, his boss, everyone who mattered in his carefully constructed world was going to be there. He was going to give a speech. It was perfect. The stage was set. The audience was invited. All I had to do was bring the main attraction. The 2 weeks leading up to the party were a masterclass in self-control. Every interaction with Tom was a test of my resolve. I had to maintain the facade of the friendly, slightly pathetic ex-husband. During one drop-off, he cornered me by my truck, a smug look on his face. "Big news, Mike," he announced, not waiting for me to ask. "They made me VP, Vice President of Lending." "Wow, Tom, congratulations," I said, forcing a warmth I didn't feel. "That's huge." "It is," he said, puffing out his chest. "Comes with a lot of responsibility. Taking care of my family, you know? Making sure they have the best of everything." The subtext was clear. Everything I had failed to provide. He was twisting the knife, and he was enjoying it. He wanted me to feel small, to feel the sting of my own perceived inadequacies. Little did he know, every boastful word was just more fuel for the fire I was building. "We're having a little get-together to celebrate," he continued, casually. "Sarah sent you the invite. You should come. It'll be good for Leo to see us all getting along." It was the ultimate power move. He wasn't just inviting me, he was summoning me to witness his triumph, to stand in the shadow of his success. He saw me as a prop in his perfect life story. "I'll be there," I said, my voice even. "Wouldn't miss it." The day before the party, I went to see Dave. I brought him a case of his favorite craft beer and a check that was probably more than his rent. "I need one more favor, man," I said, "and it's a big one." I laid out my plan. He listened intently, his expression shifting from shock to a grim understanding. "Mike, this is insane," he said when I finished. "And also kind of brilliant. But if it goes wrong, it won't," I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I've planned for everything." I needed the right equipment. My plan hinged on a visual presentation that was both undeniable and shocking. A standard office projector wouldn't do. I needed something bright enough to work in the fading daylight of a late afternoon, with a clear, sharp image. Dave hooked me up with a professional-grade short-throw projector, the kind used for outdoor movie nights. It was compact but powerful. We spent an hour testing it in his shop, connecting it to my laptop, making sure the video files played seamlessly. I edited the 3 videos into a single, devastating sequence, with no sound at first, just the damning visuals, followed by the rage-filled audio. It was a 2-minute film designed to dismantle a man's life. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my living room, the house dark and silent, and thought about Sarah. I remembered the early days, her easy laugh, the way she believed in me, and my crazy dream of starting my own business. I had let that dream consume me, had mistaken providing for her with being present for her. My failure had created the void that a predator like Tom had so easily filled. This wasn't just about saving her from him. It was, in some small way, about atoning for my own past mistakes. It was about finally showing up for her, in the biggest way imaginable. The day of the party was beautiful, sunny, sickeningly perfect. The kind of day Tom would have ordered from a catalog if he could. I spent the morning in my workshop, not building anything, but just moving through the familiar space, the smell of wood and oil a comfort. I needed to ground myself, to be the man I was, a builder, a creator, before I went over there to become a destroyer. I waited until I knew the party was in full swing. I arrived late, around 5 o'clock. The street was lined with expensive cars, BMWs, Audis, a Lexus or 2. I parked my dusty Ford at the very end of the block, feeling like an intruder. I had changed out of my work clothes, putting on a clean button-down shirt and a pair of dark jeans. I looked respectable, but not like I was trying too hard. In my hands, I carried a nondescript black canvas bag containing the projector and my laptop. I walked up the stone pathway, the sound of polite laughter and clinking glasses growing louder. The backyard was crowded. Dozens of people milled about on the perfectly manicured lawn, sipping wine and eating hors d'oeuvres. It was Tom's entire world, all gathered in one place. His colleagues from the bank, their spouses, his boss, the neighbors who admired his perfect house. Sarah was moving through the crowd, a gracious hostess, but I could see the strain in her smile, the slight tremor in her hand as she held her wine glass. And then I saw Leo. He was sitting alone on the steps of the deck, picking at a loose thread on his shorts, looking utterly lost in the sea of adults. Our eyes met across the yard. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent promise, "I'm here, it's going to be okay." He held my gaze for a moment, a flicker of something, hope, in his eyes, before looking away. No one paid me any mind as I made my way through the crowd. I was just the ex-husband, a ghost at the feast, a necessary but awkward part of the modern family tableau. I found a spot at the side of the house, near a power outlet I had noticed during my inspection, partially hidden by a large hydrangea bush. I opened my bag and began to set up, my movements calm and practiced. The large, blank, white-painted brick wall of the garage was my canvas. Tom was in his element, holding court on the deck. He was telling a charming, self-deprecating story about a banking conference, and the people around him were hanging on his every word. He tapped a fork against his champagne glass, and a hush fell over the crowd. It was time for his speech. He stood on his perfect deck, in front of his perfect house, with his perfect family standing just behind him. He beamed at the crowd, the setting sun catching the light in his perfectly coiffed hair. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice resonating with false humility. "I'm truly humbled by this promotion, but I have to be honest, I couldn't have done any of this without my incredible family." He turned and smiled at Sarah and Leo, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Family," he said, turning back to his audience, "is the foundation of everything." That was my cue. That beautiful, perfect, sickening hypocrisy was the final nail in his coffin. I didn't say a word. I walked out from behind the bush, plugged in the projector, and aimed the brilliant beam of light at the wall of his perfect house. And I hit play. The first thing that happened was confusion. A bright, white rectangle of light suddenly appeared on the garage wall, silencing Tom mid-sentence. Heads turned, murmuring ripples through the crowd. Tom squinted, trying to see who was disrupting his moment of glory. He saw me standing there by the projector, and for a split second, a look of pure annoyance crossed his face. He probably thought it was some pathetic, jealous prank, a slideshow of old family photos perhaps. He opened his mouth to say something, to dismiss me, but it was too late. The image flickered to life. The video had no sound at first, a deliberate choice to make the visuals even more jarring. The first image that filled the 10-foot-tall screen was the frantic, aggressive clicking of a mouse, the camera angle low and shaky. Then, the image lifted and the crowd saw him. It was Tom, but not the charming, polished Tom they knew. This was a different man. His face was a contorted mask of rage, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a feral light as he stared at a laptop. The crowd gasped collectively. This was not the vice president of lending. This was a cornered animal. And then he moved. On the wall, larger than life, Tom exploded. He slammed his fist on the desk. He kicked his chair so hard it flew across the room. He turned, and with a scream that was still silent on the screen, but visible in the straining chords of his neck, he lunged toward the wall and punched it, the impact made real by the shudder that seemed to run through the projected image. A woman in the front row dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the stone patio with a sound that seemed deafening in the sudden, absolute silence. Tom stood frozen on the deck, the blood draining from his face. His carefully constructed world was cracking right before his eyes. I let that silent, violent image hang there for a moment, letting the shock settle in. Then the second video began. The scene shifted to the pristine, white kitchen. There he was again, Tom, his back to the camera, looming over Sarah. She was pressed against the counter, her posture a portrait of fear. Even without audio, his body language was pure menace. The jabbing finger, the aggressive lean, the way he invaded her space. The charming host who had just been toasting his family was now, on screen, a terrifying bully. I saw his boss, a portly man in a golf shirt, take an involuntary step back, as if the on-screen aggression might spill out into the real world. And then came the final blow. The third video. The one that was for me, for my son. The shaky footage of the hallway, the sound of Tom's voice, now with audio, boomed across the perfect lawn. "Leo, I told you to clean up your toys, now!" The on-screen Leo, small and startled, and then Tom, a blur of rage, grabbing my son's arm, yanking him off his feet. The small, sharp cry of pain as Leo crashed into the table. The screen went black. The videos ended. The bright rectangle on the wall disappeared, leaving behind only the fading daylight and the stunned, horrified faces of 50 people. For a long, stretched moment, there was absolute, profound silence. The only sound was the gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the trees. Then, a single sound broke it. It wasn't a gasp or a whisper, it was a sob. A deep, wrenching sob that seemed to carry years of pain, fear, and silence. It was Sarah. She had her hands over her mouth, her body shaking uncontrollably. She turned from Tom, from the crowd, from the wreckage of her life, and ran to Leo, who was still standing frozen on the steps. She pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his hair, her cries now unrestrained. It was the sound of a dam breaking. Tom didn't move. He stood on the deck, a statue of a man, his face a blank canvas of shock and ruin. The mask hadn't just been torn off, it had been incinerated, and the creature underneath was exposed for all to see. His guests, his colleagues, his friends stared at him, their faces a mixture of disgust, pity, and horror. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. His perfect world hadn't just crumbled, it had been vaporized. My job was done. I didn't stick around for the aftermath. I didn't need to hear the accusations or the denials. The truth was there, projected onto the very walls of the prison he had built. I calmly walked over to the projector, unplugged it, and packed it back into its canvas bag. I zipped it up, slung it over my shoulder, and walked away. I didn't look at Tom. I didn't look at Sarah. I just walked, my footsteps steady on the stone path, away from the silent, horrified party. As I reached the end of the driveway, I heard the first person start to leave, the sound of a car door opening and closing, the beginning of the exodus. The demolition was complete. The drive home was surreal. The adrenaline that had been pumping through my veins for weeks began to subside, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of a peaceful suburban neighborhood, and the fallout was just beginning. I got home, dropped the bag with the projector by the door, and sank onto my couch. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the silent chaos I had left behind. I thought about Leo, wrapped in his mother's arms. For the first time, he had been publicly protected. The secret was out, and it was no longer his to carry. I hoped, with everything I had, that this was the beginning of his healing. My phone started buzzing around 9 o'clock. It was Sarah. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time before answering. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Mike," she whispered. Her voice was raw, broken. I could hear she was still crying. "He's gone." "What do you mean, he's gone?" After everyone left, he just packed a bag. He didn't say anything to me. He just looked at me with so much hatred. Then he got in his car and drove away. She took a shaky breath. "His boss called. He's been suspended, pending an investigation. Everyone knows, Mike. Everyone. Are you and Leo okay?" It was the only question that mattered. We're okay," she said, though she sounded anything but. "Leo is asleep. He fell asleep in my arms." "Mike, why didn't I see it? Or maybe I did, and I didn't want to." "He's a manipulator, Sarah," I said gently. "That's what they do. They make you believe you're the crazy one." There was a long silence. Then, "That phone. You found the phone, didn't you? In the wall." "Yes." "I was so scared," she confessed, her voice cracking. "He told me he would ruin me. He said he would take Leo, that he would tell everyone I was an unstable, unfit mother. I believed him. I was so ashamed that I had brought this man into our son's life. I thought I was protecting Leo by staying quiet." "You were surviving," I corrected her. "You did what you had to do to keep you and our son safe in an impossible situation. But you don't have to do it alone anymore." We talked for another hour. It wasn't a conversation about reconciliation or getting back together. It was something quieter, more fundamental. It was two parents, bound by their love for their child, finally speaking the same language again after years of misunderstanding. For the first time since our divorce, the wall between us felt like it was coming down. The aftermath was swift and brutal, just as I had anticipated. Tom's professional life imploded. The video, though not released publicly, became the stuff of local legend. The story spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of bankers and neighborhood gossips. He was fired within the week, his reputation in tatters. A man who builds his career on judging the character and stability of others can't survive that kind of public humiliation. Sarah filed for divorce and a restraining order the next day. With the testimony of half a dozen party guests and the specter of the video evidence, Tom didn't fight it. He vanished, moving to another state, a ghost haunting the wreckage of the life he had so carefully built. The perfect blue house went up for sale. Sarah and Leo moved into a smaller, rented townhouse, a place that didn't hold the ghosts of Tom's rage. It was a step down financially, but it was a leap forward in every other way. It was safe. I didn't get my old family back, and I never tried to. That wasn't the point of any of this. The wounds of our divorce were old and deep, and some things can't be rebuilt. But what I did get back was my son. The invisible wall of silence and fear between us was gone, replaced by something new, something stronger. A few months after the party, Leo and I were in my workshop. The late afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows. We were working on a complex model airplane, a P-51 Mustang. The tiny, intricate pieces required focus and teamwork. For the first time in years, he was himself again. He was chattering away about a new friend at school, about a funny movie he'd seen, his laughter filling the quiet space. The heavy weariness in his eyes was gone, replaced by the bright, curious spark of a 10-year-old boy. We were gluing the fuselage together when he paused, looking at the pieces in his hand. He was quiet for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Dad," he said, not looking at me, "thanks for fixing the wall." I froze, the tube of model glue in my hand. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged what had happened, even indirectly. He knew. On some level, he understood everything. He knew that my repair of that wall was the beginning of his rescue. I put the glue down and looked at my son, my incredible, resilient son. I smiled, a real smile, from the heart. "Anytime, champ," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Anytime." We finished the airplane, our hands working together. As we placed the final decal on the wing, I realized that family isn't about having a perfect house or a perfect life. It's not a picture you hang on a wall to be admired by others. It's a foundation. It's the unseen structure that holds you up, that keeps you safe. And sometimes, to save the people you love, you have to be willing to tear down the old, broken structure, no matter how beautiful it looks from the outside, in order to build something real, something safe, something true. And that's a job I was born to do. The months that followed the demolition of Tom's life were a period of quiet rebuilding for ours. The noise and drama faded, replaced by the steady, patient work of healing. For Sarah and Leo, it meant therapy sessions and long, honest conversations. For me, it meant learning to be a different kind of father, not just the fun weekend dad, but a consistent, reliable presence in Leo's life. I made a point of showing up. I went to his parent-teacher conferences, sitting next to Sarah, a united front. I coached his soccer team, trading my contractor's tool belt for a coach's whistle. I was there for the scraped knees, the homework struggles, and the bedtime stories. I wasn't trying to replace Tom or erase the past. I was simply filling the space that had always been mine to fill, a space I had abdicated years ago in the pursuit of my business. One crisp Saturday morning, Sarah called me. "The movers are here," she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "I'm finally clearing out the last of my things from the storage unit." After the house was sold, she had put most of their shared belongings into storage, a purgatory for a life that no longer existed. "Do you need a hand?" I asked. "Actually," she said, a hesitant pause, "that's why I'm calling. There's a box of your old stuff here, photos, some of your dad's old tools. I thought you might want them." An hour later, I was at the storage facility. Sarah was directing movers, a smudge of dust on her cheek, but her eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years. The tension was gone. She led me to a corner where a single dusty cardboard box sat. "Here it is," she said. We opened it together. Inside were artifacts from our shared past, photo albums from our wedding and early years, a box of Leo's baby shoes, and at the bottom, my father's old hammer and a set of wood chisels. He had given them to me when I first started my business. I picked up the hammer, its wooden handle worn smooth from his hands and mind. "I remember your dad," Sarah said softly, looking at the tools. "He was a good man. Quiet, but you always knew he was there. You always knew you were safe with him." It was the highest compliment she could have given me, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow. That was the man I had always wanted to be for my own son. "I failed you, Sarah," I said, the words I had swallowed for years finally coming out. I was so focused on building a future, I forgot to be present in the, present. "I'm sorry." She looked at me, and there was no anger in her eyes, only a sad understanding. "We both made mistakes, Mike. But look at what you did. You didn't just fix a wall. You saved us. You finally came home, in a way." We stood there in the dusty silence of the storage unit, two people who had once shared a life, now sharing a moment of profound, painful honesty. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was something more like acceptance, an acknowledgement of the past, and a quiet agreement to build a different kind of future, as co-parents, as friends, as a fractured but resilient family. As we were closing up the box, Leo, who had been helping the movers, ran over to us, his face beaming. "Mom, look," he said, holding up a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was one of my first projects, something I had whittled for him when he was 5. I thought it had been lost years ago. "I found it in the box," he said, his eyes shining. "Can I keep it in my room?" "Of course, sweetie," Sarah said, smiling. Leo looked from her to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Can Dad come over for dinner tonight? We're having pizza." It was a simple question, but it held so much weight. It was an invitation, a bridge. It was Leo rebuilding his own world, putting the pieces of his family back together in a way that made sense to him. "I'd love that," I said, my voice thick. That evening, I sat in their small, cozy townhouse. There were no picket fences, no perfectly manicured lawns. There were moving boxes still stacked in the corner and pizza grease on the napkins. It was messy, imperfect, and completely real. As I watched Sarah and Leo laughing together over a silly joke, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. Later, as I was tucking Leo into bed, he grabbed my hand. "Dad," he said, his voice sleepy, "I'm glad you're a builder." "Me too, champ," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "Me too." I realized then that my journey hadn't been about tearing something down. Tom had done that to himself. My journey had been about learning what it truly means to build. You can build a business, you can build a house, but none of it matters if you don't build a foundation of trust and safety for the people you love. My tools weren't just hammers and saws. They were patience, observation, and a father's unwavering instinct to protect his child. I had spent years constructing buildings, but it took tearing down a single wall of lies to finally learn how to build a home. A year can change everything. A year after the garden party, the world was a different place. The perfect blue house on the corner had new owners, a young family whose laughter I could sometimes hear when I drove by. The ghost of Tom had faded, reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at neighborhood barbecues. He had, as far as we knew, moved somewhere out west, another man chasing another fresh start, his past a shadow he would always be running from. For Leo, the change was remarkable. The quiet, wary boy was gone. In his place was a confident, happy 11-year-old who was the star of his soccer team and had a surprisingly sharp sense of humor. The therapy had helped, giving him the words to understand the confusion and fear he had lived with. But mostly, it was the safety. The simple, profound relief of living in a home where there were no secrets, no walking on eggshells, no unspoken rules. His relationship with Sarah had blossomed into a beautiful, open partnership. They talked about everything. She had become his fierce protector, her maternal instincts honed to a razor's edge by her experience. She had learned to trust her own judgment again, a gift more valuable than any perfect house. And our relationship, Leo's and mine, had become the bedrock of my life. The weekends were no longer just a scheduled visit. They were an essential part of our week. We worked on projects in the garage, went on camping trips, and had long, rambling conversations about everything from Minecraft to the meaning of life. He would call me on a Tuesday night just to tell me about his day, a small act of connection that meant the world to me. The wall was gone. One sunny afternoon in late spring, I was watching Leo's soccer game. He was playing defense, a solid, unshakable presence on the field. Sarah was sitting next to me on the bleachers, cheering him on. It was comfortable, easy. We had found a new rhythm as co-parents, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared love for our son. During a break in the game, she turned to me. "I got a call from an old friend yesterday," she said, her voice casual, but with an underlying seriousness. "Jessica, you remember her? From my old book club." I nodded. "Yeah, I remember." "Her sister is getting divorced," Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on the field. "And her husband, he's just like Tom, charming on the outside, a monster behind closed doors. He's got everyone fooled." Jessica was asking me. She was asking me how I knew, how I finally got out. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her the truth," Sarah said, turning to look at me. "I told her that for a long time I didn't want to see it, that I was so invested in the dream of a perfect life that I ignored all the red flags. I told her that you don't have to be physically hit to be a victim of abuse." He broke me down, piece by piece, with his words, with his moods, with his blame. And I told her that the only thing that saved me was another person refusing to believe the lie. She reached out and put her hand on my arm. "You didn't just show me the truth, Mike. You showed everyone. You took away his greatest weapon, his reputation. You made it impossible for him to hide. I want to thank you for that. Not just for me or for Leo, but for giving me a story I can now share with other women like Jessica's sister." Her words hit me with a quiet force. I had never thought of it that way. My actions, born out of a father's desperate need to protect his child, had created a ripple effect, a story of survival that could empower others. The referee's whistle blew, and the game started again. Leo, seeing a chance, stole the ball, dribbled it down the field with a surprising burst of speed, and took a powerful shot. The goalie dove, but the ball sailed past him, hitting the back of the net. The crowd of parents erupted in cheers. Leo turned, a huge, triumphant grin on his face, and his eyes found ours in the stands. He wasn't looking for approval. He was looking to share his joy. We cheered and clapped, two proud parents on the sidelines. In that moment, watching our son, happy and free, I understood the true nature of my revenge. It wasn't about destroying Tom. It was about creating the space for Leo to thrive. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about restoration. After the game, the three of us went out for ice cream. As we sat at a sticky picnic table, Leo, covered in chocolate sauce, looked back and forth between me and Sarah. "This was a good day," he said with a satisfied sigh. "Yeah, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "It really was." It wasn't a perfect family. It was something better. It was a real one. Two separate homes, one united front, held together by a love that had been tested, broken, and ultimately rebuilt on a stronger foundation. I had spent my life building things that were meant to last: houses, decks, additions. But the most important thing I would ever build was this moment, this feeling of safety, this simple, beautiful, ordinary good day. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this was a structure that would stand the test of time. It's been 5 years since that day at the garden party. Leo is 15 now, a lanky, sharp-witted teenager who is taller than me, and still loves building things in the workshop, though our projects have graduated from Legos to go-karts and custom computer rigs. The bruise on his arm has long since faded, but the memory of what we overcame has become a part of the foundation of who we are. It's not a secret we hide from, but a story we honor. A story of resilience. I still live in my small house, the one that always felt inadequate compared to Tom's mansion. But I see it differently now. It's not a symbol of my failures, but a testament to my priorities. It's a home filled with the laughter of my son, the smell of sawdust, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived honestly. My business is thriving, built on a reputation for quality and integrity. The same principles I learned to apply to my own life. Sarah is remarried to a good man, a high school teacher named Ben who is kind and patient, and who looks at her with genuine admiration. He's not flashy, not a performer. He's just a solid, decent man who loves her and is a wonderful stepfather to Leo. I see them sometimes at school events or around town, and there's no jealousy, no bitterness. Only a quiet sense of gratitude that she is finally, truly safe and happy. We've become a strange, sprawling, modern family, and somehow it works. Every now and then, I think about Tom. I think about the insidious nature of the evil he represented. It wasn't the kind of evil you see in movies, with dramatic villains and obvious motives. It was a quiet, domestic evil that thrives behind closed doors, wrapped in a blanket of respectability. His greatest weapon was his perfection. The perfect house, the perfect job, the perfect smile. He understood that society is often so dazzled by the surface that it fails to inspect the foundation. He built his life like a movie set, beautiful on the outside, but held up by nothing but flimsy supports and false fronts. My story, I've come to realize, is a testament to a simple but powerful truth. Always trust your instincts. That nagging feeling in your gut, that sense that something is off, even when you can't explain why, that's not paranoia. It's a survival mechanism. For weeks, I let the perfect picture Tom painted override the evidence of my own eyes, the cold dread in my own heart. I almost made the mistake of believing the lie, because it was easier, more comfortable, than confronting the terrifying truth. The real lesson here isn't about revenge. What I did wasn't about settling a score. Real strength, I've learned, isn't about how hard you can hit back. It's about how long you can endure, how much you can bear in silence while you gather your tools. It's about having the patience and the intelligence to dismantle your enemy's fortress, not with brute force, but with the one thing they cannot defend against, the truth. I am a builder. I understand that to fix a structural problem, you can't just patch the cracks. You have to expose the rot, tear out the compromised materials, and rebuild with something stronger. And that's what I did. Not just for a house, but for a family. And for anyone out there listening who might see themselves in Sarah's story, who feels trapped in a life that looks perfect from the outside, but is suffocating on the inside, please know this. You are not alone, and you are not crazy. Abusers thrive on shame and silence. They isolate you and convince you that no one will believe you. But they are wrong. There is help. There is a way out. The first step, the hardest step, is to whisper your secret to just one person you trust. That whisper can be the sound that brings the whole rotten structure crashing down. Thank you for journeying with me through this story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's an important one. If it resonated with you, if it made you think, I'd be honored if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And please, drop a comment below. Whether you have a similar story or just a thought to share, creating this community where we can talk about these things is why I do this. Your voice matters. Hit that subscribe button because there are always more stories to tell, always more walls to look behind. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and trust your gut.